Welcome, everyone. We'll officially begin.
Mhm.
And this is Christian Friends of Israeli Communities. We will be recording this. We are recording this, and I will send it out to everyone hopefully later today, tomorrow, for sure by the end of the week.
Okay.
And we'll get it posted on the website and YouTube as well so that you can share. So,
Mhm.
Danny Ehrlich is my favorite tour operator, tour guide in Israel. And
Mhm.
one of the I don't want to say, I don't know how to say this, but one of the most eye opening and really for me
Well, now.
experiences that I had was going through Yad
Mhm.
Vashem with Danny. I'd been to Yad Vashem before, but my tour guides in the past had always just kind of turned the group loose and said, go through it, figure it out
Right.
on your
Yeah.
own kind of thing. And I was under the impression that guides were not allowed to guide in Yad Vashem, and that's why they did it. And then Danny
Mhm.
came along and he actually guided us through Yad Vashem. And I said, "Oh, you're allowed." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, anybody can guide through it. It's just whether or not they want to or whether or not they're
Mhm.
willing to." So Danny has a great background. I think he'll tell us a little bit of his background, but he started as a social worker. So I think that helps in this
Yes.
subject particularly. But he also has led groups to Poland. And he really has a I don't know if you've got a degree in it or what, but he's done a lot of study on the Holocaust and on just what's going on over there. So, Danny, go ahead, and why are we doing this today?
All right. So, I mean, in terms of the Yad Vashem, it's interesting. Most guides in Israel know the Israel story, which makes sense. That's why they're guides here in Israel. I've been involved in Jewish education as a whole for 40 something years, and with a special focus, of course, on Israel, but also on the European Jewish experience, which is both my family's history. And as Kim said, I guide what we call Jewish heritage groups and also Jewish groups, Christian groups in Europe to learn. Look, it's over 1,000 years of Jewish history in Europe, very formative period of time. 1,000 years is a long time. And that's also a piece of the puzzle that makes up Jewish identity today. So I guide trips in Poland and in Germany and in Austria and in the Czech Republic and Hungary. So it's a very rich. So I'm very comfortable in Yad Vashem. This is issues that I deal with on a regular basis. Now, as Kim was saying, tonight, Jewish holidays will start in the evening and continue into the next day. And there's a whole discussion throughout Jewish history. Should it be that way? When we read in Genesis and it was evening and it was day, does that mean evening comes first and then day comes? Or that's a whole discussion itself, but certainly the holidays go this way, evening to day. In the temple, apparently it went day to evening. In terms of the temple service. So it's interesting. But we start our observance of Yom HaShoah, and we'll get into terminology soon enough as we go through. The Holocaust Memorial Day starts this evening with an official ceremony at Yad Vashem. And then tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., the siren will go off for 2 minutes. The air raid sirens go off for 2 minutes. The whole country comes to a stop, and remembering those who were murdered, the Jews who were murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust and the Shoah. We'll be doing it again next week for Israel Memorial Day. We remember the over 21,000 men and women who have given their lives so that we could be free in this country. But this 24-hour period is dedicated to the memory of the Shoah. Now, folks, this is a very tough topic. The last two topics, many of you were with us together. We did the history of Jerusalem and our connection to it, Capernaum, and these are fun topics, interesting topics. This is a painful topic, and it's especially painful with the lens that we've chosen for a CFOIC related group. Because look, the Shoah, the Holocaust, is part of the lens through which many Jews see Christians and Christianity. It sits at the nexus of contemporary Christian-Jewish relations. It's interesting. For Jews, this is self-evident. For many Christians, this is an unintelligible mystery. What does the murder of the Jews by the Nazis have to do with Christians and Christianity? I mean, it's a good question. Many Christians, while viewing the Holocaust as a terrible tragedy, but they see it's an aberration. It has nothing to do with Christians or Christianity. For Jews, though, by and large, the Holocaust is the latest and maybe the most brutal chapter in the long history of over 1,000 years of hatred, persecution, and mass murder by Christians, or at least people who call themselves Christians. Without acknowledging and confronting Christian anti-Semitism and its connection to the Holocaust, it kind of remains the elephant in the room and really blocks true understanding and bridge building between Jews and Christians. So for the next 45 minutes or so, I'd like us to walk this path together and let's see where it takes us. Look, I remember years ago, I think the first time I was guiding a Christian group in Yad Vashem. Till that point, I had guided only Jewish groups in Yad Vashem. And it was a small group. It was a group of pastors from all over the world. And at the end of the visit, one of the participants came up to me. He was a British Christian missionary in Africa, I think, working in Africa. And he thanked me for the teaching, but he said something that for me was just the aha moment. I hadn't even thought of this. He said, I, of course, knew something about the Holocaust, he says, but I had no idea of the history of 1,000 years of Christian anti-Semitism, persecution, and murder of Jews. I had no idea. And I was dumbfounded. I thought that everybody knew this. But then it never occurred to me that some Christians were unaware of this dark and tortured history. But then I thought about it and I realized, where would most Christians learn about this? In church? In Sunday school? In a general history class? Sadly, no. Very unlikely. Now, I know that many of you, especially via your involvement with CFOIC, are much more knowledgeable about this than most people are. And I think that this background that many of you have will make our learning together today more productive and more meaningful, because we're starting at a place where people know already a lot and understand a lot. So let's begin. I'm going to try to share screen. As we know now, it doesn't always cooperate as it should, but let's see if we can get it to do so. Let's go to the beginning. And let me set up the things here. Okay, so we titled this session tonight, Jewish-Christian Relations in the Wake of the Holocaust and in the Shadow of the History of Christian Anti-Semitism. And so first, let's start with terminology. We generally use the word Holocaust when we speak in English to refer to the murder of the Jews of Europe by the Germans and their allies during World War II. Now, Holocaust comes from, you can see here on the screen, it's actually from a Greek word, a complete burning, holos and kostos, and often used for sacrificial offering, a full burnt sacrifice. In Hebrew, a korban olah. Now, the book of Leviticus, right, is full of instructions about how to do various types of sacrifices. Actually, sacrifice is not the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is korban, and korban means coming close to God. Somehow gets translated as sacrifice. It doesn't have the same nuance as the Hebrew korban. But in any event, you have all sorts. In some of the sacrifices, the Levite, the Kohen, the priest, and the person bringing the sacrifice eat from the sacrifice. It's sort of like a barbecue everyone's having together. But then you have a sacrifice that's this holy burnt one, the Korban Olah. If you look at older dictionaries written before World War II, you might find older biblical translations into English, you might find a term like a Holocaust offering. Now, to our post-World War II ears, that sounds horrible. What do you mean a Holocaust offering, right? But that's what the word meant originally before World War II, something that's fully burnt, a conflagration kind of idea. Now, there's a problem with calling the murder of the Jews of Europe Holocaust, and it's not just semantics. First of all, completely burned. I'm speaking to you from Efrat, just outside Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish state. Folks, we're still here, and we're not a wholly burnt anything. Yes, 1/3 of the Jewish people, 1 in every 3 Jews was murdered during World War II in the Shoah, but we're still here. The second problem is that the Holocaust has the connotation of an offering, a korban, a sacrifice, and the idea of saying that the victims of the Nazis were somehow a sacrifice. Right? A sacrifice, by definition, is redemptive. It's redemptive. It's an insult to their memory. It's an insult to the survivors. That the Nazi murder of my family is meant as redemption for the world. So slowly but surely, we're moving away from the term Holocaust. I mean, it's still used, and going with the word that was chosen in Hebrew, which is Shoah. It's a biblical term. And that means catastrophe or devastation. Originally, it meant to make a din or a crash, and it developed into crash into ruins, and then to ruin and lay waste. And you can find this throughout the Tanakh. Another term that was used in the early years after the World War II was Chorban Europa, the European destruction. And Chorban is the same term that's used to describe the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by Babylonians in 586 BC and by the Romans in 70 CE. So it's important that the terminology is important because it has values to it. So we're moving more and more. You're living here, English speakers won't even say Holocaust. We'll have Shoah studies, meaning catastrophe or devastation. So the first question really has to be, how did the Jews end up in Europe, right? We know the Jews are the Judeans, right? They're from, you can see here on the map over here, from Judea. What are they doing up here in Europe? Well, the answer is pretty much the Roman Empire. Remember, the Roman Empire will rule a vast area from North Africa up into southern and central Europe. And Jews are part of the Roman Empire. And many of them will come as administrators, some in the military, many merchants. And even if areas that the Roman Empire are not ruling over, but people will be coming up here on trading missions and creating trading posts, just like in the U.S. West, for example, in the 19th century. You have a lot of that going on. Same thing happens here. So we have evidence of Jews throughout Europe, certainly in Italy. The book of Maccabees tells us that Judah the Maccabee sends a delegation that settles down in Rome already. That's in the 130s, probably 140s BCE, and by the 2nd and 3rd centuries, we have Jews in all sorts of ways throughout Europe. We find it in the archaeology, by the way. We find tombstones in especially like Romania and Hungary, this area over here, Dacia and north of it, where Jews were already. So Jews move into Europe, even though they're from Judea. And then, of course, after the destruction of the temple in the year 70, and then as persecution grows in the land of Israel, which we'll get into a little bit, more and more Jews will move up here into Europe. But what it means is that Jews get to Europe before most of the ethnic groups that make up Europe today. Jews are getting to Europe in the 100s, 200s, 300s, 400s, 500s. When do most of the ethnic groups come in? You can see the Slavs, the Poles. They're coming in the 400s, the 500s, and the 600s. Much later than the Jewish populations that are there. So Jews are already here in these areas. Jews that are here are coming from the Roman Empire. They're generally literate, able to read and to write, whereas many of the Slavic tribes coming in do not have that ability yet. So Jews will become a major and important asset for these communities. They have international connections to what was the Roman Empire, and in the early period what was still the Roman Empire, for trade. They can read, they can write. So Jews get a very sort of I'd say honored position within these new pagan Europe of the 500s, 600s, 700s. And one of the things that, the 700s now. What happens though is Europe will have slowly but surely become Christian. And you can see in the pink by the 600s, these areas are Christian, sort of where the Roman Empire was. But by the 800s, the areas of the Slavic tribes, Poland, Russia, etc., will become Christian as well. Now, theoretically, this could have been good news for the Jews. You know, they say one of the things you're not allowed to do in history is ask the question, what if? What if? And the question, but I like to ask those questions anyway. You know, what if Jews and Christians have been able to join together and say, you know, here we are, the monotheists in a pagan world. Let's join together. Let's join forces. It would have been a very different world, but that's not what happened. As Europe becomes Christian, that sort of honored position that the Jews had in the pagan population is eroded, as Europe becomes Christian, the anti-Semitic teachings of the early church fathers will now come from the Roman Empire area up into sort of what had been virgin territory until that point. So instead of it becoming, oh good, here come more monotheists, here come enemies. And what do I mean? Look, there's so many, but I chose just a few. St. Augustine will become one of the sources. And it's interesting, he's seen in his own time and afterwards as someone who's sort of friendly to the Jews because he says, don't kill them, right? I mean, you know, with friends like that, as they say, you know, he says, don't kill them, but not by bodily death shall the ungodly race of carnal Jews perish, but what? Scatter them abroad, take away their strength and bring them down. This becomes mantra, this becomes policy. Keep the Jew down. And if in the pagan society, the Jew down the street was very well respected, he was a merchant, he could write your letters for you, he could be helpful, he could have contact around the world. Suddenly, that Jew down the street is now somebody evil. And of course, the church father, John Chrysostom, I never pronounced him correctly, from the 300s, was particularly virulent against Jews. The Jews sacrificed their children to Satan. They are worse than wild beasts. The synagogue is a brothel, a den of scoundrels, the temple of demons devoted to idolatrous cult, a criminal assembly of Jews, a place of meeting for the assassins of Christ, a house of ill fame, a dwelling of iniquity, a gulf of abysm. I mean, it goes on and on. So these are just two examples of many, many. Now, how are people in Europe learning about what it means to be a Christian? Remember, most of them are illiterate, and if you know your church history, remember the Catholic Church, which is the only game in town, Christian-wise, basically, in terms of an organized group in the first 1,000 years or so of Christianity in Europe, forbid individuals to have Bibles anyway, even if they could read. So you only learn about it when you go to church and you're told by your priest what the Bible says. And the art, of course, in the church, the art that has been compared, the art in church has been compared to television. Medieval television is art in church. And look at one of these pieces of art that you'll see. You see, it's a number of churches in different forms. On the left, you see a figure that represents church, Christianity. You see it's a queenly woman standing tall, looking out straight, and the figure to the right is the synagogue representing the Jews, blindfolded. Her staff is broken. She's blind. She doesn't see the truth. And this image will be repeated in lots of different forms over and over again. And you don't even have to say anything, right? You just go, every Sunday you come in and you see it, it becomes part of your consciousness. Jews, some of the church fathers will suggest that Jews are not descendants of Adam and Eve, but they're descendants of the devil. And here you see, again, a common depiction. You see, we'll get into the symbol. You see the round symbol here? That was a special symbol that Jews were required to wear by the Christian authorities. And you can see the horns representing the Jew as the devil. And here I threw in a modern cartoon, if you will, replacement theology that says, listen, God made all sorts of promises to Israel, but Israel is canceled. From now on, Israel is the church. And therefore, if we're the real ones, what do you do with the fake ones, right? You get rid of them. So there's, starting in the 700s, 800s, as Europe becomes Christian, from the Christian perspective, great, wow, Europe's becoming Christian. From the Jewish perspective, it means that this place that had been somewhat welcoming is becoming less and less welcoming, becoming more and more dangerous as Jews are identified. Now it reaches So as by about 1100, most of Europe has become Christian, and this anti-Jewishness becomes more than just words, more so than before at the time of the Crusades. Remember, 1096 to 1099, the first Crusades get organized in Europe. They're going to be heading down from the area of Germany, France of today, down through Constantinople, down to Jerusalem. And on the way, they will massacre the Jewish communities of the Rhine River Valley. This is the heartland of what will become known as Ashkenazi Jewry. So remember, Jews are moving into Europe in the 2, 3, 4, 5, 600s. The local people that we know today, the Slavs and some of the other people, show up in the 4, 5, 6, 700, 800, 900s. By the 1000s, most of them have become Christian. By 1099, this anti-Jewishness results in deadly massacres of the Jewish community. And essentially, it's the forced conversions. Jews are given the choice, convert or die. And massacres of Jewish communities will take place everywhere. As you can see down here, some crusaders put it bluntly: either the Jews must convert to our belief or they will be totally exterminated. Folks, this is 1,000 years before the Holocaust. They and their children down to the last baby at breast. And unfortunately, this is repeated over and over again as the Crusaders make their way down, massacres of Jewish communities. And we begin to get this concept of Kiddush Hashem. You see this down here, to die for the sanctification of God. It hadn't been something that was really part of Jewish thought. It was there in the background, but it didn't come up that often. The idea that you would have to choose between your physical existence, living, and your faith. It really wasn't that much part of the Jewish experience until this point. So the development about around the time of the Crusades, where thousands and thousands of Jews will choose to die by the sword and to be burnt at the stake, as you can see in these two medieval pictures, and often burned at the stake in the shadow of the cross. So the cross, which wasn't a particularly popular Jewish symbol to begin with, since the Romans crucified tens of thousands of Jews on the cross, but now it takes on a whole new evilness for the Jews. The Jews are going to be massacred by Christians holding the cross, marching with the cross in the name of Jesus, the Jew. But again, I don't think most crusaders knew that. Even if they knew that, they wouldn't understand what could that possibly mean. So we see a huge change, right? The first, up to about 1,000, 1,100 Jews have a fairly decent position in Europe. But by the time Europe is Christianized, the Jewish position is going to change. We get the blood libels, where Jews are falsely accused of murdering Christian children in order to use their blood in religious rituals like baking matzah or reenacting the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, this is so absurd on so many levels. We're dealing with hate, though. For example, what does the Bible absolutely forbid Jews to eat? Blood, right? You have to drain the meat of blood totally as much as you can. And secondly, what is matzah? We just celebrated Passover, Pesach. Matzah is flour and water. If you add anything else to it, what is it not? It is not matzah. But it didn't stop, over and over again, hundreds and hundreds of cases, tens of thousands of Jews are murdered. If a Christian child went missing or was late coming home, the Jews did it. And by the way, don't think that blood libels are ancient. Blood libels were taking place in Europe in the early 20th century, in Poland after World War II, after the Shoah. There's still blood libels. And unfortunately, the Muslim world has taken over this idea. They just switched the holiday, whereas in the past, in Christian blood libels, Jews were kidnapping a Christian child and grinding him up to make matzah, or draining his body of blood to reenact somehow the crucifixion of Jesus. In the Muslim version of it today, Jews kidnap a Muslim child, grind him up to make the filling for the hamantashen on the holiday of Purim. Now, we look at that and we can almost chuckle, but millions of people will read this in mainstream Muslim media and believe it. to be absolutely true. And, I think I've shared this with some of you, when you were here. I mean, about 10 years ago, maybe, guiding a Christian group in Israel, and we were talking a little bit about the blood libel came up, and somebody in the group said, oh, she said, that's just terrible. She says, we know Jews don't do that anymore. And she didn't hear herself say it, but the group did, and they all gasped. She said, oh my God, she said, what did I say? Then she said, I must have been taught this somehow as a child. So anyway, this becomes very much a part of, and if you poll people and they have polled people in Europe today, this belief that the Jews do things like this, like the blood libel, like poisoning the wells, host desecration. Jews would be accused constantly of creeping into churches in the middle of the night and finding, the wine and the wafer, which certainly in Catholic belief, I think in some other beliefs as well, becomes literally the body of Jesus, right? This is my body, this is my blood, and stabbing the wafer over and over again to reenact the murder, the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, most Jews, if you said, you broke into the church and you desecrated the host, they say, what's a host? No idea. But this is used over and over again. You can see on the map so many different places where these accusations happen over time. Now, this is the 1200s. Now we're into the 1300s. The Jews of Europe are accused by the Christian neighbors of poisoning the wells and causing the Black Plague. And again, here in these maps, you can see the locations where massacres of Jews take place because their Christian neighbors believe, they've been taught, and don't forget, they've been taught already that the Jews are evil. They've been taught already that the Jews are in league with the devil. They've been taught already that maybe the Jews are descendants of the devil, all these things. So when you then say, yeah, and look what they're doing, it makes sense to people. So you create a deadly atmosphere that you don't even have to keep repeating because the atmosphere is there already. People, this backdrop that's there. Now you might say, so why didn't the Jews leave Europe? Folks, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go because look what happened. Well, we'll get to in a second. So what happens is church and civil authorities force Jews to live separately from Christians in ghettos, as we'll call them a little later, actually, and to wear badges and hats of shame so they can be easily recognized and shunned. Look here, you can see this would be a yellow circle that you can see it here, you can see it here, that Jews will be forced to wear, and the Jew hat that they're forced to wear as well. And again, this should be echoing already. The yellow circle becomes the yellow star, if you will, and the armband with the Star of David that the Nazis will force the Jews to wear. It's not something new in Europe to force the Jews to do that. So by the 1300s, after the huge massacres of the Jews, and the Jewish population has shrunk tremendously. Jews are forced into ghettos, forced into separate districts. Their livelihoods are severely limited, what they can do, what they can't do, how they can make a living. They're in horrible poverty. They're being killed, they're being shunned. And this is all in the name of the church, all led by church leaders. And it's so ironic, led, in the name of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the Jew, but that irony seemed absolutely lost on the Christian population of the medieval period. Now, we get to the 1500s, and here, we get to the Protestant Reformation, and this is, I call it a mischance for Christian-Jewish reconciliation. Because on the one hand, Jews had a real problem with Christianity for a very long time. Because look, you look at Byzantine Christianity, Catholic Christianity, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, you got a holy family, mother, father, son kind of thing, Mary, God, Jesus. You have statues, you have art, you have bowing at statues, you have, from the Jewish perspective, these were the same Roman pagans, who were worshiping Zeus and Hera, and now they just call them by the Hebrew names. Nothing changed. It was a very high. So Jews had to look at Christianity for the most part as some form of idol worship rather than a form of monotheism. It was a tough issue. And then comes the Protestant Reformation and a move away from so much of that sort of paganism and idolatry. And Jewish, by the way, Jewish leaders will sit up and recognize, say something's changed. We can now recognize some Christians, at least as fellow monotheists, if you will. And then Martin Luther, who starts out initially advocating humane treatment of the Jews in the belief that Christian hate and persecution was what was preventing the Jews from seeing the light and becoming Christians. So he was convinced that if the Jews would be treated more humanely, Jews would become Christians. But that's not what happened. Jews remained Jews. And that when that didn't, he began to viciously attack the Jews. And in 1543, he wrote his famous or infamous work on the Jews and their lies. And look what he advocates in there. This is the 1500s. That synagogues and Jewish schools should be burnt, Jewish books should be destroyed, rabbis should be forbidden to preach, Jewish homes should be burnt down, property and money should be confiscated, Jews should be shown no mercy or kindness, afforded no legal protection on the roads, and these poisonous and venom worms should be drafted into forced labor or expelled from all time. He also seems to advocate murdering of the Jews. Whoops, sorry, I gotta come back out. Saying that we are at fault for not slaying them. And look at this, eject them forever from this country, for as we have heard, God's anger is with them, is so intense, etc., etc. Now, the Nazis saw Luther's teaching as an inspiration and precedent and a guide for their own policies towards the Jews, and often quoted and cited his words as proof of the danger that the Jews represented to European Christian society. So, you know, from the 1500s on, there could have been a change in this relationship. And briefly, there was a little bit of light as a possibility, but it just got worse because now the Catholic Church always said, listen, scatter them, but don't kill the Jews, even though there was plenty of massacring going on. And now we get the leader of the Reformation speaking about killing the Jews as well. And what begins to happen throughout this period, both in Catholic countries and in what will become Protestant countries, Jews are expelled and massacred throughout Christian Europe. So that's what I was saying before, you know, why did the Jews just leave? Well, there's not so many places to go. England expels its Jews in 1290. France expels its Jews in 1306, 1322, and again 1394. Vienna, there's massacres and expulsions. Prague will happen over and over again. Jews don't have a lot of choices where to go. And then something amazing happens. Starting in the 1200s, Poland, which is emerging together with Lithuania, will join with as a new power in Europe, will say to the Jews, please come here. We need your expertise. We need your ability. And they'll offer safe haven to what we can call now Ashkenazi Jewry already, coming from Western and Central Europe, will make their way further east into what will become Poland. And just very briefly, by 1264, the statue of Kalisz, Boleslav the Pious, Catholic, he's one of the important first Catholic kings of Poland. But he gives rights to the Jews, and just in red to see a little bit of it. Should a Jew be taken to court, you also need a Jew to testify against him. You get a sense of what was happening. As a punishment for killing a Jew, says this groundbreaking legislation, a suitable punishment and confiscation of property is necessary. In other words, Jewish life is not a free-for-all. A Jew may freely and securely walk or ride without any hindrance. These are rights that Jews did not have almost anywhere else in Europe. No Christian is to accuse a Jew of a blood libel. Now, in 1334, Kazimierz the Great of Poland expands Jewish rights in the Polish lands. You see this beautiful, I think it's a 19th century painting showing Kazimierz the Great over here, sort of in the orange, and Jewish refugees coming in, being granted and being so excited. King Kazimierz is said to have had a Jewish mistress, Esterika. That's a story in itself, which we won't go into as well. And so in the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, Poland becomes the place where Jews are not being massacred, they're not being persecuted as they are in England, France, the German-speaking lands, etc., etc. And then Poland begins to become a major Jewish center. During the Black Plague, we get waves of Jewish refugees fleeing Western Europe. And you can see the massacres and expulsions: Britain 1290, France 1306, Vienna 1420, Spain 1492, Portugal 1497, Prague 1501, etc., etc. And then Poland and Lithuania join together. You get a growth of the Jewish population, and Poland begins to emerge as the major Torah center, major center of Jewish life by the 1500s in Europe. And then we have the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And look at the map. As soon as that window thing disappears, you can see how central and large this new kingdom of Poland-Lithuania was in Europe. And this is a golden age for Poland and for Polish Jewry. Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth becomes center of Ashkenazi Jewry, and you begin to understand that Jews by the thousands will move eastward in the 1600s into the area of Poland. In the 1700s, we have the emergence of the shtetl, the predominantly Jewish market villages. Most of the Polish peasantry were farmers. And as the Industrial Revolution gets going and the cities emerge as their important markets, they don't have the ability to get their goods to market. So the predominantly Jewish villages, the shtetl, will become the market villages where the Polish Christian, mostly Catholic farmers will bring their produce, and then the Jews will be the middleman to bring it to the market. So the Jews, even in the rural areas, the Jews begin to have an important economic role. But by the 1600s, 1650s, it's the end of the Polish Golden Age. Poland itself will become partitioned in 1795. So from 1795 to 1918, Poland no longer exists as a country. It's partitioned between Russia, you can see in the red, Prussia, which is the forerunner of Germany in the blue, and in the south, Austria, or this area will be called Galicia. So Poland doesn't exist between 1795 and 1918. And that means that the Jews of Poland are no longer living in a single political, cultural, religious, and linguistic entity. But still, these lands were still where most of European Jewry is living. Now, Russia has a problem. You can see here, Russia takes over huge swaths of Lithuania and Poland, right, of the old Lithuanian-Poland Empire. And you can see it here on the map of Russia. But the partition of Poland brought millions of Jews who were living in the formerly Polish territories under Russian rule. This is the Russian Orthodox Church and the Tsars. The Russians did not want large numbers of Jews from the Polish lands moving into Russia proper. Russia had already banned Jews from the 1500s. So the Jews were required to continue living in the former Polish lands. Look at the red and look at it over here. It's more or less the same area, which became the core of what's called the Pale of Jewish Settlement, where Jews were permitted to live. And this is where the Jews of Europe will be living the largest amount in areas that were formerly Polish, but come under Russian rule already by 1795. By 1880, over 5 million Jews live in the Pale, and 80% of world Jewry live in what used to be Poland. Now, 1881 to 1914, facing extreme Russian persecution, economic restrictions, and mass expulsions, over 2.5 million Jews will flee from the Pale and other sections of partitioned Poland, many of them ending up in the United States. Most of the American Jewish community has its roots in what was essentially Polish Jewry under Russian rule. One in 1914 who find refuge in the United States. My mother's family on her father's side, they arrived in the US in the 1870s, fleeing from Russian-controlled Poland. My mother's family arrives in 1903, fleeing from Russian-controlled areas as well. So this is very important. Now, the persecution, if you've seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof, it's Hollywood, but movies can do it very well for us sometimes. So I want to play a short, about 5 or 6 minute scene here. It's cleaned up because it's Hollywood. It was much more brutal in reality, but this is when a pogrom is going to happen. A pogrom is a action against Jews, which will happen throughout the Russian Empire. Remember, most Jews are living in the Russian Empire, and it's in the 1800s. It happens either organized by the government or approved by the government or allowed by the government. So let's watch the film for just a few minutes here.
I hear the congratulations are in order, Tevye.
Oh, thank you, Your Honor.
Tevye's daughter just gotten engaged.
Tevye. Tevye.
Yes, Your Honor.
I have this piece of news I think I should tell you as a friend.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm giving you this news because I like you. You're an honest, decent person, even though you are a Jew.
Oh, thank you, Your Honor. How often does a man get a compliment like that? And the news?
We have received orders that sometime soon this district is to have a little unofficial demonstration.
What? A pogrom? Here?
No. Just a little unofficial demonstration.
Little? How little?
Not too serious, just some mischief, so that if an inspector comes through, he can see that we did our duty. Personally, I don't know why there has to be this trouble between people, but I thought I should tell you.
Thank you, Your Honor. You're a good man. If I may say so. It's too bad you're not a Jew.
That's what I like about you, Tevye. You're always joking. Congratulations again for your daughter.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Oh, about the other matter. It won't be too bad. I wouldn't worry.
Yeah, of course not.
Do you like these troublemakers? These Christ killers?
Of course not. I just meant that things have been peaceful here.
I have other villages to visit. If you don't want to follow orders, we shall get someone else who will.
Oh, no, sir. I'll take care of it, of course.
I said enough! Come!
Orders are orders. Understand?
Well, why are you all standing around? Clean up! Clean up!
This is a cleaned up Hollywood version of the pogrom. In actual pogroms, you would have a lot of dead Jews, bayoneting of pregnant women. I don't even want to go into the horrific details, but you can imagine what went on. After every pogrom, you have pictured the bodies lined up. And by the way, there was Jewish self-defense. They tried, but Jews by and large were not armed, were not allowed to be armed. And of course, the pogromists, as you see, something that does come through here, are led by the local police chief. Now, he happens to be a decent guy in Fiddler on the Roof. But again, that's Hollywood. And sometimes you have decent people, but it's led by the local police, by the local militia, by the local army. What are unarmed people going to do against that, especially in a tradition already of a 1,000 years of second-class persecution, being pushed from place to place. So that's the backdrop of why Jews will leave the Pale of Settlement, leave Russia, and Russia wants to get rid of its Jews. So it's sort of a win-win, if you will. So these pogroms are partly part of the pressure of the czars in the mid-1800s to get the Jews out. But again, from the Jewish perspective, it's simply a continuation of the Christian persecution and anti-Semitism. Get the Christ killer, get the Christ killers. This will be the constant refrain. Now, things begin to change, though, in the late 1800s, even the late 1700s. Certainly in Western and Central Europe, Jews begin to get equal rights. Look, as you can see, by the way, Russia, they don't get equal rights until 1917, the Russian Revolution, and that's most of the Jews, because this is all Poland and Lithuania over here on the left side of it. But in Central Europe, in Germany, well, that's not Germany yet, but it will become Germany, the German-speaking lands, and in Austria, in France, in Britain, you can see by the 1800s, Jews are beginning to get some sort of rights. Because until that point, let's say a Jew wanted to be a doctor, wanted to go to college throughout the medieval period and up to these dates here. Well, he could. There was just one thing he had to do, one little thing he had to do, convert, become a Christian. Then you can go become a doctor. Let's say you wanted to own land and be a farmer. Well, you can, absolutely. Just one little thing. You have to convert and convert and become a Christian, etc., etc. By the mid-1800s, we begin to get countries, again, you can see mostly in Western and Central Europe, giving not what we would consider today to be equal rights, but for that period, it's a beginning of recognition that non-Christians or the Jews specifically are the big other here, also are people of some sort too, and should have equal rights. So some of the ghettos begin opening up, and to some degree, you can read the rise of Nazism, if it had just been an anti-Semitic movement, as a pushback against the emancipation of the Jews, because Europe Christian society is used to having the Jews down. The Jews could not participate in general society. Suddenly, we let them out of their cages, essentially out of their ghettos. And folks, Jews were like a kid in a candy store. They were so excited. We can participate in general European culture, and we can go to university. And Jews become doctors and lawyers and teachers, you name it. Very often in Central and Western Europe, forgetting their own Jewish heritage, and they'll embrace the sort of new European heritage for sure that the redemption has come. And what will the liberal Jews, if you will, what becomes the basis for Reform Judaism of today in Germany say? We are no longer part of a Jewish people. We no longer see ourselves as the Judeans in exile. We are Germans of the Mosaic faith. And if the history wasn't so tragic after that, it would be funny. But this is a mistake that Jewish communities make over and over again. We are Germans of the Mosaic faith. We are Frenchmen of the Mosaic faith. We are Americans of the Mosaic faith. The Jewish communities will, are so happy to be let in, if you will. But this is the beginning of it. Till this point, Jews could not be in any of these professions that Jews are so associated with today. It's amazing how recent these developments are. Anyway, what happens after then is World War I. After World War I, Poland gets reconstituted as a country. Remember, they stopped being a country in 1795. They were a partition between Prussia, Austria, and Germany. And Russia. But Lithuania and Poland becomes Poland again. And once again, you have millions of Jews living in Poland. They didn't move. The borders just kept switching, right? What had been part of the Russian Pale settlement, now parts of it become part of Poland again. So suddenly Jews find themselves once again Polish. Now, after World War I and beforehand, we begin to get the rise of extreme nationalism as countries jockey for position. We'll have it in Poland. We'll have it especially in Germany as it emerges from World War I. And you begin to get these cartoon stereotypes, unfortunately, which are still used plenty. Here on the left, you have something from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The Tsarist secret police create this myth that a group of Jews met in the Prague cemetery to figure out how to take over the world. Folks, this is still published. People believe it still today. But certainly they were believing it in the 1920s and the 30s. You can see here the idea that all the that the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union controlled by the Jews. The Jews are controlling everything. The bourse, right? The stock exchange, all the money controlled by the Jews. The Jew as the wandering Jew. And this is actually, I think, a more modern one here. But look at this, the Jew as the devil, the kind of thing, which we'll find as well. So, and of course, the idea of Jewish texts being full of evil, and you see here the Jew as the devil. So these images, which have been consistent throughout European history, now move into the modern era in the 1930s. Now, by 1939, over 6 million Jews live in Poland and the USSR, the Soviet Union. 3,300,000 had become Poland after World War I again, and another 3 million in the Soviet Union, including the Pale settlement areas over here, and then about another 3 million Jews in other European countries. So 9 to 10 million Jews living in Europe. Look, in Poland, Jews were over 10% of the population, a major population group. But look in Germany. Germany, Jews are less than 1% of the population. And yet the Nazis, building on over 1,000 years of anti-Semitism, mostly religious Christian anti-Semitism, are able to convince an entire country, and then others, that the Jews, less than 1% of the population, are the source of all their problems. And you think about it, it's ridiculous, and yet they're able to do so. And then, again, we're not going to go deeply into the Shoah. That's not our focus today, even though it's for Yom HaShoah. We're doing more background issues. But September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. Remember, Poland ceased to exist in 1795. It came into being again in 1917 at the end of World War I. But it only lasted till 1939. And again, it is partitioned. The Poles are used to that. The eastern part becomes Russia. The middle part comes under German control. Under the western part comes under German control, but the middle part also comes under German control. And you remember the infamous non-aggression pact between the Nazis and the communists in 1939, where essentially you can see the red, Eastern Poland becomes Soviet and Western and Central Poland becomes German. And we're going to go back into the story for a minute, but here on the left again, you see the numbers of the Jews in each country. And here you can look on the right and see how many were murdered. 90% of the Jews of Poland were murdered, over 3 million. 30% of the Jews of Germany were murdered because they had more time to get out. The Netherlands, 75% of the Jews are murdered. Hungary, 70%, 550,000 are murdered. About 6 million Jews are murdered. Now, folks, people die in war all the time. What makes this so, one of the things that makes this so unique was this was a government policy to round up every last man, woman, and child of the Jewish communities and murder them. It wasn't like in the accident of war, people caught in the crossfire, or there was a famine. I mean, all these things happen in war, unfortunately. These were organized programs. That's not today's topic of how it happened. That's a whole separate lecture in itself. But what we're getting here, just to give a sense of a timeline so that we know what happens here. Look, the Nazi Party comes to power in Germany in 1932, 1933. By 1935, they passed the Nuremberg laws, which strips the Jews of Germany. Remember, Jews saw themselves as Germans of the Mosaic faith. They were such loyal Germans. They couldn't imagine this, but Jews are essentially stripped of their citizenship rights. 36, the Berlin Olympics. The Nazis have been persecuting the Jews publicly already at this point for 3 to 4 years, and the world still had the Olympics in Berlin in 1936. This is forever a blot and a shame on the Olympics. It wasn't like they didn't know what was happening. It was happening in the full view of the world. 1938 is a seminal year, and it's a year that the world could have acted but chose not to. 1938, Austria is next to the German Reich. Remember, Austrians are German speakers, but they were Catholics, and Germany was more the Protestants. That's why there's really two separate countries, the Habsburgs. And so now they're merged together in one Reich. In July, there's a conference in Evian, France. What of the Allies, the good guys, if you will, who will become the Allies, the United States, Britain, Australia, France, what to do with the refugees. You already have hundreds of thousands of German and Austrian Jews trying to get out. My father's family was they got out in 1939. My father was born in Vienna. He and his parents and his sister managed to make it out. The Evian conference, what to do with the refugees. Country after country will get up and say, essentially, we can't take any Jews. In September of the same year, and Hitler sees that as a green light because he's been persecuting the Jews publicly for years already, and the world, has been saying, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." And then essentially they have a conference to say, "Are we willing to take the Jews of Germany and Austria?" But the answer was no, and Hitler understood that meant pretty much of a green light. In September, remember, Neville Chamberlain will fly to Berlin and speak about his meetings with Mr. Hitler. It can be dealt with. Peace for our time. Thank God, Churchill was waiting in the wings. But in October, this is all 1938. Each point here, if the Allies had acted, they could have stopped Germany. The Allies betrayed Czechoslovakia and Sudetenland, the westernmost part of Czechoslovakia, is lopped off and given to Germany. And in November, we have Kristallnacht, with the attack on the Jews of Germany and Austria. Every synagogue just about in Germany and Austria is burnt down that night. 30,000 Jewish men are arrested, sent to concentration camps, and Jews are told they need to leave. That's the initial German Nazi policy. But remember, the world has already met in July at the Evian conference and said, we're not taking Jews, even if they can get out. Unless, again, the lucky few were able to. March 1939, having seen that the Allies did nothing in October 38 when they gave them Sudetenland, Germany invades and takes over the rest of Czechoslovakia. And again, the world does nothing except words. So September 1st, 39, the war starts in earnest. Germany invades Poland. And as we saw on the maps, Poland is partitioned between Germany and the USSR. And then we get 1939 when they march into Poland. And again, we're going through this very quickly. I apologize. Jews will be forced from their homes in Eastern Europe. Again, primarily Poland at this point, where we have over 3 million Jews, and they're put into ghettos. Remember, Jews had lived in ghettos for centuries. We saw on the map when Jews start getting civil rights, there were Jews still alive in 1939 who might have been born in a ghetto. There are Jews still alive in 39 whose parents grew up in ghettos. This was part of Christian Europe. You kept Jews separate. So it didn't necessarily set off alarm bells for Jews and say, oh God, they're going to kill us all. Once we lived, persecuted for 1,000 years in this kind of way, we can do it for a few more years. How long will the war last? We just had what we call World War I. Lasts for a few years, you suffer terribly, and then life goes on. They never imagined what the Nazi Party was going to try to do, the full murder of all the Jews of Europe. So now, in June 41, there's a big change. Germany breaks its non-aggression treaty and invades the Soviet Union. Millions more Jews now under the German control. And now they're going to start experimenting with mass murder. From June 41, remember, this is when Germany invades the Soviet Union. Behind the German troops come the mobile death squads. This is going to be in eastern Poland, Belarus, Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, and the mobile death squads, and they're going to murder 1,800,000 Jews, men, women, and children, between June 41 and December 42. How do they do it? Well, imagine you're in a war. The victor marches in. He tells you, it says, okay, all Jews, you have to report tomorrow morning, to the town square. You're going to be taken to a ghetto. You're going to be taken to a Jewish district. You're going to be taken to a place to work. No one's thinking, oh my God, they're going to kill us all, because who does that? No one does things like that. I remember Germany was the first area to give Jews civil rights in the 17 and 1800s. So no one imagined this. And then they're marched out of town, ostensibly either to the next village or to the railroad station, wherever it is, taken into areas where other Jewish slaves have been forced to dig what they're told are anti-tank pits, and they're gunned down in the forest. And the numbers keep going up because this is happening in eastern Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, all developing countries today post-communism. And as they build new buildings and build new highways, they find more sites of mass murder that we didn't know about. So our current estimate is 1,800,000 Jews are murdered by the mobile death squads. Places like Babi Yar, outside of Kiev, Ponar, outside of Vilna. These are places where mass murders happen. Now, as this is going on, the Germans see that this is working, this mass getting rid of the Jews. There's a secret conference that we only know about. It's a secret conference. We don't know about it. Then we only know about it after the war, where they make the decision of what they call the final solution to the Jewish problem in Europe. They're going to murder the Jews of Europe, and they create what we call the death camps, or the extermination camps, as they'll call it. I won't use the term extermination camps. That's what you do to vermin. But that's how the Germans will see the Jews. And between 1942 and 1945, approximately 3 million Jews were murdered in the death camps. Chelmno, 350,000. Sobibor, 250,000. Belzec, 500,000. Treblinka, 870,000. And in the Birkenau subcamp at Auschwitz, 1 million Jews, or around, or maybe a little more, are murdered. So about 3 million Jews murdered in the death camps. And again, the Jews are put onto trains. They're not told, we're taking you to die. They say, we're taking you to work. We're taking you to be resettled. And when they get off, they're told they're going to have a shower or whatever it is. And then the gas comes down. In 3 years or so, over 3 million Jews, an additional million Jews or so, are murdered in the concentration camps and slave labor camps, where they're worked to death, essentially, in the ghettos themselves. For example, in the Warsaw Ghetto, over 500,000 Jews crammed in to a 2-point-something% of the city. Jews were 25 to 30% of the population of Warsaw, and over 100,000 Jews die in the ghetto before they're shipped to Treblinka, where most of them are murdered. So this just gives us a general timeline of this. It develops over time, and the Jews can't imagine that anybody's planning on doing this. Who does things like this? To murder an entire civilian population. Now, it's interesting. While Nazi anti-Semitism is built on the history and social reality of Christian anti-Semitism, it had a different ideological focus. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Nazism is Christian. It's not. But it builds on the social realities that were built by the Christian anti-Semitism over the centuries. But Christian anti-Semitism was religious. Nazi anti-Semitism will build on that, but it's going to focus on racial anti-Semitism, because historically, Jews often had the option of escaping Christian anti-Semitism by converting to Christianity. But although the vast majority of Jews, when confronted with the choice of death or conversion, chose death, what we call in Hebrew, al-kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name, rather than give up their faith. Under Nazism, though, this traditional escape hatch of, oh, okay, I'll pretend to convert to Christianity, didn't exist anymore. But people didn't know that. They didn't understand that necessarily. And we get a remarkable personality, Rabbi Yitzhak Nissenboim, 1868 to 1942. He's murdered in the Warsaw Ghetto by the Germans. He was a religious Zionist leader in Poland. Remember, we have this term, Kiddush Hashem, right? That you die for the sanctification of God's name. And he puts it so well. He says, we have to change it. Now we need Kiddush HaChaim, sanctification of life, staying alive. Here's what he wrote. This is the hour of Kiddush HaChaim, sanctification of life, and not of Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God by death. Formerly, our enemies demanded our soul, and the Jew sacrificed his body in sanctifying God's name. He was willing to give up his life. Now the enemy demands the body of the Jew. That makes it imperative for the Jew to defend and protect it. So the older model, if you will, of, oh God, when they come to forcibly make you leave Judaism, you have to be willing to give up your life. Rabbi Nissenbaum says that no longer applies now. Now they're trying to get you to give up your life. Stay alive. And if that means violate, if you have to eat on Yom Kippur, if you have to violate the Shabbat, if you have to eat on whatever it is, you do it and you stay alive. That's what the hour demands. And just quickly, during the war in Poland, I wanted to get us to this dialogue over here. This is from the book, The Holocaust Kingdom. It's really a remarkable book by Alexandra Donat. And they're in a slave labor camp in 1944. They came from Warsaw. They were there in the Warsaw Ghetto. And they're discussing, why don't the Poles help us? Right? And we're going to get to a minute. There were Poles who helped, but why don't the Christian Poles help us? What's going on? And listen, just read it through. This is part of this dialogue that he brings to us. It says, for years, the first speaker says, for the years, the Poles have been dreaming of getting rid of the Jews, and now Hitler does it for them. At bottom, they're delighted. However, they're horrified by the inhuman cruelty. In Poland, there has not been a single guerrilla attack on a concentration camp for Jews, not a single attempt to stop a train carrying Jews to the gas chambers. And just parenthetically, there was a very robust Polish underground that did all sorts of actions. Why? And here's the answer that he gives, because to them, to the Catholic Poles, the Christian Poles, the Jews had never been part of the Polish nation. Patriotic solidarity does not apply to them, and they don't fall under the commandment of love thy neighbor. Now, his fellow that he's speaking to, another Jew in the slave labor camp, says, but wait a minute, a Pole who shelters or helps a Jew is subject to the death penalty. They themselves are terrorized, and there aren't that many heroes. If the shoe had been on the other foot, would we have risked our lives to save them? It's a fair question. I have to move this so I can see here. And then the response. He says, I admitted that the Poles were terrorized, but I insisted that they were a courageous people. And they were threatened with death not only for sheltering Jews, but for many other things: smuggling, slaughtering cattle, trading in foreign currency, and other activities, reading underground literature, listening to foreign broadcasts, and so on, and they kept right on doing it. Why was it that only helping Jews scared them? I don't blame the individual Pole, he says, but their leaders, this is Alexander Donat speaking, government, political parties, intellectual, the Catholic Church, who failed to create the proper climate. A Pole didn't hesitate to slaughter a pig, which was against the law under the Nazis, because it was praised as a patriotic virtue. But saving a Jew was a sin and a disgrace. Now, you can see what happens in Europe. It's not just Poland. Poland, and we'll get to Poland back to one in a second. You can see country by country, 90% of Polish Jews were murdered. Over 85% of Greek Jews were murdered. Similarly, Lithuanian Jews, Latvia, Yugoslavia, Netherlands, Hungary, country by country. You can see most of the Jews of Europe were murdered. But we come to a wonderful, wonderful thing called the righteous among the nations, Chasideo Mot HaOlam. It's also a biblical term. Yad Vashem has recognized almost 28,000 righteous among the nations for non-Jews, for saving Jews during the Shoah, and the largest groups are Poles. Now, Poland has a very mixed history. It has a lot of anti-Semitism passed during the war itself. Estimates are that 200,000 to 300,000, about 10% of the Jews of Poland who are murdered in the Shoah are murdered by their Polish neighbors. At the same time, it has the largest group of people who risk everything, because if you're caught by the Nazis hiding a Jew, you're going to be killed and your family are going to be killed. And when I take groups to Poland, one of the places I do love to get to as much as possible is this little village of Markowa in Poland, and the memorial to the Olma family. And look at the Olma family, the mother and father, the husband and wife, and their children. They had 5 children, and she was pregnant with her 6th. They were hiding a Jewish family, and they were betrayed. And the Germans came, took the Jews away, and they were murdered elsewhere, and then lined up the Olma family and shot them one by one, including the children. And the inscription on the monument reads, "Saving the lives of others, they laid down their own lives, hiding 8 elder brothers in faith." Now, again, for a Polish Catholic to say that, it's referring to the Jews instead of the Christ killers. That's already a statement. They were killed with them. May their sacrifice be a call for respect and love to every human being. They were the sons and daughters of the land. They will remain in our hearts. Irina Sendler up here, who just died a few years ago, was a nurse and a social worker, I believe, and she smuggled hundreds of Jewish children out of the Warsaw Ghetto and found hiding places for them. She was very active in one of the leaders of an organization called Jagoda, which was an underground movement to help save Jews during the war. So Irina Sendler, amazing. So Poland has this huge anti-Semitism problem, also had a lot of very good people. Now, after the war, when some of the thousands of people who saved Jews and risked everything to save Jews were approached and said, how did you do this? Where did you find the strength to do this? After all, you were risking your life, your children's life, maybe even your entire village's life. 2 wonderful answers come out. One that says, I'm a human being, what else could I do? And the other one says, I'm a Christian, what else could I do? And to me, they're the little bits of light, if you will, a little starlight on a very dark screen. Because most of the Christians of Europe said the Christ killers are getting what they deserve. Whether they participated or not, didn't matter. It seemed to make sense to them that the Christ killers should be meeting this end. Because after all, they had been conditioned, they had been educated for over 1,000 years in Europe. The church and the leadership had conditioned people that Jews really don't have a right to live, Jews don't have a right to prosper. And when Germany puts that on the top of their banner, it resonates for people very well. So you really can't separate the two. Yes, Nazism is different. Nazism will target the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church as well. But most of the Nazis perpetrators and the collaborators in other countries saw themselves as good, loyal Christians and saw not only no contradiction between what they were doing, but saw it as a fulfillment even of Christian imperative, Christian identity, and Christian belief, murdering of the Jews. And just to end off, folks, it hasn't gone away. The hate has not gone away. Thank God. There are millions of Christians, I think, who have been able to look at their past and say, listen, the future has to be different. But we know that it's still a minority. And there are so many in the world who still will love to blame the Jews for everything. And you can just see some, and this is just contemporary, you see kind of this is somebody in a supermarket in the US, keep calm, it's just the Jew flu. Give a hug, spread the flu to every Jew, the Holocaust, the constant desecration of Jewish tombstones all over the world. The Jews killed Jesus, God hates Israel, God hates Jews, new Nazis, fascist murderers, COVID-19, Jew flu, on and on and on. So when we say never again, it's not just something for the past. It's very much alive and with us, and we have to be alert to it. And I think you more than there are things that you can do that I can't do. The fact that there's still so many people who call themselves Christians, but yet have a hate. It's nice that the popes have finally begun to call the Jews our older brother in faith. But we know there's so many Catholic leaders and members of churches who still have this horrible hate. The mainline Protestant churches, a lot of them have a real Jewish problem. And have not been able to free themselves from it. And maybe the seminal work on this, and it's a tome, but some of you have probably read it, Constantine's Sword, and I recommend it to anybody. You have to slog through it, but it's worth it. Tells the story of the development of Christian anti-Semitism, or Christianity as it develops in anti-Semitism. And he's a former Catholic priest. What's his name? James Carroll, I think. He's a former Catholic priest. He's got issues with the Catholic Church, but if you can put those aside, it's a masterful work. He makes such a telling statement. He says, Christian anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem, or not only a Jewish problem, it's a Christian problem. And if we don't address it, it's at the very core of our being, and it rots at the core. So there's a lot of work to be done still. And one last piece, again, to understand a little bit how Jews see Christians. I've been blessed. I have so many Christian friends, and I've spoken to and taught in churches and gotten to look. When I was growing up, the idea of a Christian who would be friendly to a Jew, even in New York, was almost, what? I mean, that doesn't. How's that going to happen? But certainly for me, in the last 20, 30 years, I've seen that there are so many wonderful people who have made the change, if you will, or swimming against the current, if you will, of Christian history to some degree. But many Jews look at the Martin Luther story, not Martin Luther King, Martin Luther story, and say, here's someone that comes along and says, we're going to treat the Jews with love because, well, we know sort of now, because we have more of his writings, he said, well, treat them with love because then they'll convert. And many Jews looking at Christians like yourself today say, is this a Martin Luther? This is a Martin Luther again. Are we going to discover, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line, when we don't become Christians, that the love becomes hate? And we know there's nothing worse than a hate that started out as a love. It's even more virulent than regular hate. So that's definitely one of the fears that prevents Jews from sometimes openly embracing, Christian friends. And secondly, the awareness of the violent history and the suffering that our parents and ancestors went through. So there's a level of suspicion, and you have to respect it. And at the same time find a way of overcoming it. And always, I think for anyone, being a good person is a good start. But it's not, the fear hasn't gone away. We're not that far removed from it, and it's growing. I'll end with this. You always say that the far right and the far left only agree on one thing: hate the Jews, get the Jew. And we're seeing it today so clearly in the political arena and in the religious arena that it's very frightening, I think, for Jews today, and for those who stand with us, I know, are concerned and frightened as well. So I'm happy to take questions if you're still awake. Yes, can you provide me with the biography? Lots of interesting book titles you mentioned. Yes, I will send that to Kim. Definite ideas of where you can go.
And we will definitely be posting the slideshow as well. So once I get the video up and Danny gets the slideshow sent to me, those will be posted and available, and I'll send them out in the email with a link for that. So one of the things that I just wanted to bring up real quick, and that is, if anyone, we sit here as Christians and we say, well, what can we do, or how do we, this isn't our kind of Christianity, or I wasn't responsible for the Holocaust. And I think for me personally, we have to ask a question, or I've asked myself this question of, would I have been one of the righteous among the nations, or would I have gone with the flow? And I mean, thank God I'm not in that situation, and I don't, can't answer that. I'd like to say I would have been one of the righteous among the nations. But today, I think it gets uncomfortable. Like, Danny, you can kind of address this as well. When Christians come up and, apologize or say, Christian repatriation, we shouldn't have done this. We should have had more that stood up for it. But I think that each and every one of us can make a difference today. One is just acknowledging where the foundations of the Holocaust came from, and that it did come out of a very anti-Jewish mindset that was deeply embedded in the church, unfortunately. And then the other thing is, get the word out. When you hear things that are just simple, I grew up and I remember a pastor when I was a child saying, take your Bible and everywhere that you see Israel, cross it out and write in the church. And, and I was about 10 years old, and something rose up on the inside of me and said, that's wrong. That can't be right, because God's not done with the Jews. And this is not okay to say that. So just even little simple things, choices that we make on a day-to-day basis. And, and going forward, we have a project right now that is for senior citizens in Gush Etzion, some of which are Holocaust survivors. So if you want to say, you know what, I want to do something today, that's a way that you can do something tangible today, would be to reach out and bless a Holocaust survivor and make their life a little bit better today. But each and every one of us can do that. I've got some questions coming in. Let me see what I've got here. And feel free to unmute yourself. We'll try not to be too
I see
crazy.
There's a bunch of questions on the chat.
Yeah. Do you want to read through them, Danny? You want me to read them?
So I certainly can definitely, there's our technical problem on but
yes.
Yeah. But I thought I had solved because I'd done it elsewhere, but anyway, we'll figure that out. So here's the question: how did that show love to Jewish people without causing offense as a believer in Yeshua HaMashiach? Now, it becomes a problem. I would say this: when Jews encounter a Christian who comes as a friend is a friend. But if I'm a target, then that's not friendship. So if I'm becoming your friend because I'm going to show you, I'm going to bring you to the truth, it might come from love. But if that's the basis of our friendship, that's not really friendship. I'm a target, and then you'll find that the walls sort of go up. And look, the trick to life in general, I suppose, is to learn to live with others who you might agree with and not agree with. Find people that you agree with enough things on values and how to live your life and what's important and what's not important, and then to say, you know what, but there are things we disagree on as well. And Jews and Christians, if we want, we have so much in common. We could focus on the things that separate us, because there are, and we should. And I'm comfortable with that, because for me, I'd say, what a boring world it would be if we were all the same, but we're not. But it'd be good if we can all be the same without killing. We'd not be the same without killing each other for our differences. So, I think it's I don't think any Jewish person should expect a Christian to say, you should be proud of your belief in who you are. Maybe an easier way to say it is, if you look, when pagans in the Roman Empire become Christians, right? Let's say about 1800 years ago, 1900 years for the most part, and start reading the Tanakh, plus, the Christian scriptures. On one level, Jews are thrilled. Wow, our book is now being read by millions of people who had no connection to it. But then when the new Christian church came and hit us over the head with the Tanakh and said, and you've been reading it wrong, that's when things start going, bad. So it's okay to say, listen, we read it this way, you read it that way. I think when you become a person of faith saying, this is, God made the world this way, if you will. It's easier for me as a Jew because we don't have the urge to go and convert Christians to Judaism. I know that some of my Christian friends are exerting tremendous self-control by not proselytizing, because it's more inherent within what it means to be a Christian. But you got to ask yourself, how do you respect friends without turning them into targets, without betraying who you are? And it's a balance. But I think honest grappling with that and being honest about it helps. In terms of that, I think. But yes, many Christian churches today that still support replacement theology, and even if they don't call it that. But you can go into churches. I've met Christians who don't know that Jesus was born a Jew and died a Jew. Don't know. They had no idea that was so. And they go to church, but they don't know. So it's so there's a huge amount of that. It's the de-Judifying, which has been the trend throughout the centuries. And I say, to me, it's I almost see it as tragic because, as my Christian friends say, we want to get to know Jesus, in all aspects. And if you ignore his earthly ministry in Christian belief, which was as a Jew, how do you understand? And if you ignore what he observed and what his disciples observed and what they believed, right, which was Judaism of the late Second Temple period, then how are you connecting to them? And yet millions of Christians manage to do it, and it's unfortunate, but it's that's why I say so many. I think many of you you're swimming against the stream. You're swimming against, you're swimming upstream, and the overall Christian stream is still. I don't think it's changed. What's wonderful, the miracle I think that God has created in this generation is that there are millions of Christians who say, no, this is not the way to go. But I think the majority, either consciously or sort of unconsciously, don't know. And those that do know, some of them aren't comfortable with it. Like, how did the Nazis deal with the fact that Jesus was a Jew? They simply downplayed it, ignored it, and managed to come up with all sorts of ways of explaining it away.
And we see that today because if you don't have to scratch very hard, and you will find that Jesus is the newest Palestinian. So, he came from Bethlehem, so he's Palestinian. And that is a form of this replacement theology of stripping the Judaism away from, or the Jewish factor away from Jesus, because it's very uncomfortable. Jesus was a Jew. How do you deal with that? Well, we turn him into a Palestinian. Yeah. And as a Christian, the answer that I would have, how do we show love to Jewish people without causing offense? Well, we just simply love them with no agenda. That's the biggest thing is, their quote unquote salvation or their relationship with God. As with each and every one of us, it is a work of the Holy Spirit, and it is a personal thing between a person and God. And it's not our place to be the Holy Spirit. It's not our place to declare whether or not they're saved or not. And so when you can let that go as a Christian, then as Danny said, they're not a target. They're not, you don't have this going after them. So then all of a sudden you can have a relationship, you can have a friendship, you can show love, and there is no offense in that, because we don't hide our Christianity. And I've never yet met a Jew who's been uncomfortable or been like, could you hide Jesus a little from me? That's never been an issue. Now, if I try to shove Jesus down their throat, yeah, that's an issue. But me being who I am and what I believe, we have all kinds of crazy conversations because we have friendship and there is no offense on either side. So it's really a matter of us as Christians being able to put that in God's hands and say, that's between them and God, and I don't have to play that role. So it's a departure for mainline Christianity. It really is. So I think another question that came up, it was more of a comment, is they were surprised to see the number of Christian churches that support replacement theology. And that's true. You know, one of the things that was a real eye-opener for me, and I think most people, if you talk about Christian anti-Semitism, everybody can lay the blame at the feet of the Catholic Church. You know, so that's real easy. As Protestants, hey, you know, it's the Catholics. It was them. It was them. It was them. But Martin Luther was one of the worst anti-Semites, and the worst that, you know, that's what the Holocaust was based out of Martin's writings. So just to acknowledge that it is throughout Christianity, Catholic, Protestant, doesn't matter. It's there. And there is a resource. It's pretty hard to find because it's out of print. It's called Let the Lion Roar. So it's a DVD. You can get it on like eBay or whatever. It's like, you can't buy it new any longer. So I think I might have got mine on Amazon, but Let the Lion Roar. And they did a phenomenal job of putting this into a 2.5 hour theatrical presentation about this whole issue. So, you know, it's good. It's just another resource if you run into somebody that says, well, there's no such thing as replacement theology, or there's no such thing as anti-Semitism in the church. Yeah, there is, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a private question that came to me, so I won't mention the name. How do I respond to the trope that Jews control all the money? And it's not just the money. I mean, the Jews control the media, the money, and obviously it's
banks.
The banks. That's a long answer in itself. But you know, I almost have a humorous answer to it. I say, listen, if we controlled all the money and controlled all the media, would we be in this much trouble? Just think about it. You know, if we had all that power, would, you know, Israel be constantly threatened? Would Jewish communities all over the world be in constant danger? Really? That's what you get when you control everything? I don't think so. It would be nice. I want a bank. If someone could give me a bank, I'll take a bank. But again, one of, you know, I learned so much from people that I have a chance to guide with and tour with. Another Christian group and spoke about whatever, and then she says, "Well, look, at least there's been a Jewish president." And she said as follows. She says, "I think it's wonderful." She says, "the way God has blessed the Jewish people." I said, "Oh, so do I. But what do you have in mind specifically?" She said, "The way that the Jews control all the banks and the media." To which I said, a lovely woman, I think her name was Janice. I said, "Janice, you know what I'm saying? You've just repeated this anti-Jewish trope that's just not true." And that's why I used my line: "If we controlled all that, would we be in this much trouble?" And she said, "I thought it was a good thing." She said, "I thought Jews should control all that. I think God had blessed the Jews that way." And then her follow-up line was, "Well, thank you for, they sort of setting me straight on that, but at least there's been a Jewish president of the United States." Now, I knew where she was going, but she didn't know that I knew yet, and she didn't understand either. I said, "Who?" She was a woman, this is about 10 years ago, she was a woman in her 60s, I think. She said, Theodore Roosevelt. Not Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR Roosevelt. And of course, what happened during World War II? When the United States enters the war, and there's the anti-war, and then those who say we have to go into the war in the United States, they say Roosevelt. They called him Roosevelt, the Jew. The Roosevelts, the upper class wasps, from upstate New York. Roosevelt, the Jew, is entering the war to save his Jewish buddies. Wow. And this is what the anti-Semites were saying in the 30s. Now, she said, "Oh my God," she said, "I heard all these things at home growing up." She says, "As an adult, I just thought they were good things." But she said, "I didn't realize I'd grown up in a home, even if they didn't use the term, we hate Jews, a home that had a lot of anti-Semitism. I grew up in a home," she says, "I only realize now, 50 years later, I grew up in a home where we were told that the Jews control the banks, and the Jews control the media, and the Jews control Washington, and it's just, again, if it was true, I think we'd be in much better shape, we Jews, but it's not true, and it can't be true. We're a tiny minority, and we're a tiny minority, by the way, which loves to talk and to argue It's almost impossible to keep a secret in a Jewish community. So how would we exactly have this worldwide conspiracy when every Jewish community is busy talking about everything at all times all together? So it just doesn't compute. But you're dealing with hate, not with logic. And it's very hard to refute hate because hate isn't based on facts. Hate isn't based on logic and thinking. Hate is hate. How do you respond to hate? Well, love is one way, and sometimes hate has to be dealt with by uprooting it. I mean, when it's criminal hate, it has to be dealt with. It has to be confronted. It has to be met. And we're seeing, again, we're seeing it both on the right and the left today in American politics and politics all over the world. Unfortunately, what happens is the media will tend to focus only on the hate that comes from the far right and gives the far left a pass. And that's really unfortunate because it lulls people into believing that, one group has a monopoly on this, but they don't. You have the far left, which is rapidly anti-Jewish, rapidly anti-Israel. Oh, yes, they'll like Jews as long as you give up all your loyalty to your people in any way, shape, or form. It's on both sides, but again, we have to focus, I think, a little bit more today on what's happening on the left, because we're seeing in the media, you see plenty of what's happening on the extreme right, but what's happening on the extreme left is just not covered as much. But again, it's not I don't think it's a nefarious, what would you call it, plot. It's just that so many people in the media are on the left and they don't really want to look at negative things in their own group. They're much happier looking at negative things in the other group. And therefore, so those of us, I think, who can see both ends have to really be able to say, listen, you got to look and see where it's happening, from all sides.
And do a lot of Jewish people that live in America call America the Promised Land and not Israel?
Well,
I don't think so.
I mean, you don't forget the initial, the big Jewish, the first big Jewish community that came from Europe to the U.S. in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, before the big exodus from Russian-controlled territory, were the German Jews. They were the first ones. And they came with this idea, Berlin is our new Jerusalem. And they transferred that a little bit to the United States. New York is our new Jerusalem. Cincinnati becomes the center, actually, of, and they will try to denationalize, which will be the classic Jewish reform movement in the late 1800s, early 1900s, sort of denationalize Jewish reality and say we are only a community of faith. We are not a people anymore. We have given up our desire and dream to return to the land of Israel. Early reform in Judaism in the 1800s into the 1900s will be anti-Zionist. This will change after the Shoah. It changes a little bit. Before, you always had some leaders who were, Zionists, but by and large anti-Zionist. And as I said, we are Americans. We have no desire to go anywhere else. The old joke in the early 1900s was, what's the definition of an American Zionist, American Jewish Zionist? Is somebody who gives money to a British Zionist to send Russian Jews to Palestine, right? As it was in the early 20th century under Turkish and British rule, because the American Jews weren't going nowhere, and the British said we're not going nowhere. We're happy where we are. Now, look, what happened, the Holocaust changes things to some degree, certainly for European Jewry. Whatever illusions with the remnants of European Jewish communities had were mostly gone. The illusion that we could live in Europe as equals and that's where our future will be, the Shoah will pretty much end that. American Jews will continue to have some of that fantasy. And again, I'm not saying anything bad about America per se, but I think you look at history, and I see the hand of God here. Look, God, there are centuries where we had no choice. We had to live in the exile. We had no choice. There was no way to go home, if you will. But once the door opens up, and the door has been open now for over 100 years for Jews to come home, then there are divine plans that, look, it's too amazing to have happened just because we worked really hard.
Absolutely.
You know, and when God opens a door and you don't walk through the door closes.
Yeah.
And in my prayers, I pray for American Jewry regularly because I think they're living in an illusion. Again, life is very good, and it's good. I mean, America's where my family found refuge, and we're very loyal, and we loved America, and we still do. Even though but home for Jews is the land of Israel. The Bible.
Amen.
History tells us so. So, you know, it's fine. You know, we love America. We're grateful to America. But when the door opens, it's time to go home.
Yeah.
And do you have a teaching on Herzl or Weizmann?
A teaching on Herzl or Weizmann. Not particularly, except to say that Herzl saw it clearly. You know, Herzl had, Theodor Herzl is the founder of political Zionism. Very important. He's not the founder of Zionism. Jewish tradition, Jewish teaching, the Torah. They say God is the first Zionist, right? And not Theodor Herzl in the 1800s. But Theodor Herzl comes and says, listen, praying is great. Learning about it is great. Wishing for it is great. We have to do something. And even going and buying land and farming the land, that's great too. We got to do something politically about it. Right, we have to change reality, and that's his big contribution. But he said that it says we Jews have been guests in in other people's countries for centuries. We had no choice, but we were guests in other people's countries. He says, and you know what happens when you have a guest? You're thrilled when they come for the first few days. But then when they don't leave, when are they going to be leaving? He says, it's time for us to leave. It's time for us to go home and stop being a guest in other people's countries. And I think April wrote in here, a former pastor of mine bought a new car and he bragged about how he had Jewed them down for a better deal. These words are still used. Look, the atmosphere on college campuses in the U.S. right now for Jewish students is toxic. And I'm proud to say that there are many Christian groups like QFI, there's student QFI, stands with the Jewish students. But Jewish students are being attacked physically, verbally, emotionally, every way that you can be attacked, both by their professors and by students. Murderers, Palestinian right issues, and Jewish kids on campus are feeling increasingly isolated, and they face a choice. It's like, historically convert or die. Yep. So now it's give up anything anything publicly Jewish, especially if it relates to Jewish national existence, like the state of Israel. Then you'll be accepted. Otherwise, you, in certain cases, in certain campuses, like in some of the very liberal California campuses, especially, it's a toxic environment for Jewish students today. So there's a lot of warning signs today, no question.
Absolutely. It looks like we have one final question. I'm not really sure how to answer this because I don't see this as replacement theology, although it could be. Some people say that the temple was not on the Temple Mount. Is that also a form of replacement theology?
Well, it depends who's saying it and for what reasons. For example, when Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Authority said it, they were definitely doing replacement. They were saying, the Jews don't belong here. And what was really doubly sad about that, in order for a Muslim like Yasser Arafat, even though he was a communist too, but he was basically a Muslim Arab, to say that there was no Temple Mount here, he had to do violence to Muslim sources, which clearly indicate that the reason it becomes holy to Muslims is because this is where the temples were. I mean, it's just so absurd. If you're having an academic debate, about archaeology, was it here, was it there? And it's a real academic debate, not one that's, masquerading as, ideology through an academic debate. Then all these debates are legitimate, but there's really no, I'm not aware, and I read just about everything that's out about this, of any serious archaeological position that does not put the Temple Mount on what we call the Temple Mount today. There is disagreement on what was the Holy of Holies right over here, or was it right over here, or was it right over here? There's some very good, discussions based on what we find in the archaeology, and there is very good discussion about where was the fortress, the Baris fortress and the Antonia fortress. Was it down in the City of David area? Was it further up the hill? And again, we learn archaeology in the old city of Jerusalem is amazing. We're learning more and more and more every day. So what we thought we knew for sure 5 years ago, keeps getting turned on its head, and that's exciting. That's exciting. But to make to try to sever the link between the Temple Mount and the temples is a little absurd. And again, sometimes you say, even if it turns out historically and archaeologically, which I don't think it will, you have a good 2,000 years of veneration of this site as the site of the temple, and everything that we find there, from the gates to the little bit of archaeology that has been able to be done there, to Muslim belief about the site, to Jewish belief passed down through the centuries, to Christian belief passed down through the centuries, indicates that this was the temple site of the temple. So I don't think that there's really no reasonable position to doubt it in any way. And again, was it right over here, right over there? But it's all within that monumental platform that was built. And we have the textual sources that tell us why it was built. Why else would you build it if not for the temple? So just from so many angles, that's the Temple Mount.
My goodness. You guys have been a great group. We've been almost 2 hours, Danny. Feels like we're on tour again. Hey, thanks guys for your time. We really appreciate it. And yes, we will have this video up. It'll take me a couple of days to get it edited and up, but we will have it available and we'll send it out. So thanks,
and
guys.
Send some bibliography ideas, some great books on these issues.
Definitely. And I'll send out an email. You guys can email to Danny directly as well. Look forward to hearing from you.
And I would say, one thing I would suggest, that what we've done in Israel and all over the Jewish world is, people have lit a memorial candle tonight into tomorrow. Well, here in Israel, it's already, what day is today? It's already Wednesday night into Thursday. A memorial candle to remember the 6 million Jews. So, some sort of, if you want to bring it into your home, some sort of, memorial is certainly appropriate, I think, to do at this point. We can't do anything for the victims. All we can do is remember them. And so we try to do so.
I hope you enjoyed that video. And we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below, as well as on the notification bell. And that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you and have a wonderful day.